Story 1. My wife has started eating me alive, and I don't know what to do. I'm using this throwaway account just to get my thoughts out. My name is Jason, and hers is Mariana. We met in late August of 2021. I was smoking on the side of the building I worked at. I had just seen the death of my mother at the hands of a heroin overdose 3 days earlier. I didn't sleep a wink for those 3 days, so I sunk myself into my job at a terrible hardware store. She walked round the corner, past the giant propane tank before she checked around her shoulder to look at me. Our eyes met instantly, then she smiled. Her beautiful black hair crept down her back. Her dark eyes were like out of a painting. She looked somewhat like my mom in a silly way. I smiled back. I even managed to give her a half-assed "how you doin'?" She kept walking. I've been wondering how my life would be if that's all it ever was. But it wasn't. She came back to the hardware store the following day. Mariana had stepped in looking for a handsaw. She saw me working behind the counter, then proceeded to ask for my help. She had a notepad, which was open. She told me the exact details of what she wanted. A folding pruning saw. I checked her out, even gave her my employee discount. She placed the notepad down on the counter when paying and left without it. I was going to chase her to give her the notepad, but I saw what it said. All that was written were the 2 words of "call me" along with her number. Later that night I did. She answered on the 3rd ring. We talked for hours, then scheduled a date for the following Saturday. Welp, then it was history. We had a wonderful date. During that first date, I learned she was from Venezuela and why she was in town. The reason she was in town is because she had been visiting her uncle. We spent several more nights together, kissed the 4th date, then she went back to Venezuela the day after our 5th. We had kept in contact, then started dating officially a few weeks after she returned to Venezuela. I offered to visit there several times. She said she didn't want me to. We had no relationship hiccups, not until I cheated on her. It was just once. I had gotten used to sexual polygamy because of the relationship with my ex-boyfriend. I should go into more detail on him, but we'll leave it at this. He didn't love me, just used me for money, along with my unconditional love for him. At least he used me for that until he left me for another guy. He wanted an open relationship, so I had gotten used to that. Maria said she had forgiven me. I don't think she ever had. She managed to visit the US again, then her visa was extended so she could move. This was all to the chagrin of her mother, who never wanted her daughter to leave, let alone for a gringo like me. Her mom said I would never understand their values. I never met or spoke to Maria's mom. We got married early 2023, March 5th in specific. She was lucky enough to get her green card back in September. At this time, I had switched jobs to a professional kitchen as a line cook. Her uncle gave her a job at the company he owned. Soon enough, I was able to switch from working full-time to working part-time. Then I could give Maria my undivided commitment as a house husband of sorts. We're both young. I'm 33, she's 31. I was able to re-engage in my interest with the guitar. One autumn evening, I played it for Maria. I failed a lot, and she didn't judge me for it. Understood my nerve damage. She always called me pretty. Never judged me for the mistakes I made because of the nerve damage in my arms or the scars that caused them. Back in November, Maria had asked me about Thanksgiving and what the meal plans were. I told her I'd make whatever she wanted. She said all she wanted was me and gently hugged me from behind, then kissed my cheek. A couple of weeks later, about the 14th, she had asked me randomly, "Have you ever wanted to eat anyone?" I responded no, then asked if she wanted to. "Yes, I do." "Want to eat me?" My sarcastic tone picked up. "Would you let me?" "If you ask nicely." We both giggled like baboons. The next night she asked me, "Jason, can I eat you, please?" "Sure." Grabbed the carving fork. I smiled, then went to look at her, yet her face was bare with no emotion. "Maria?" "Jason, I want to try eating someone, and you said you'd let me if I asked nicely." I felt a bit confused by this statement. I wanted to make a joke, but couldn't. My eyes fell to the floor, only to rise back to her face. I was going to say no, but couldn't. I'd do anything for her. I needed her more than anything. When I wouldn't be able to see her because I was at the kitchen or she was at her job, I wouldn't be able to feel my face. I wanted to ask her uncle for any job positions at his company, but she never let me meet him. I didn't care to fight for it. I'll take a bath and cut off some of the dead skin from my foot for you, okay? She nodded. I went upstairs, where I drew myself a bath. I grabbed my safety razor and unscrewed the blade from it. After soaking in the hot water for a while, I carefully cut off the dead and hard skin from my heel. I didn't do anything too fast or too deep. I took my time, and by the time I was finished, both of my heels were bare, red, with small slivers of calluses. I kept them on the outside of the tub. I drained the water and dried, then clothed myself. I took the chunks of dried skin and made my way back down to the kitchen. There Maria was waiting, right where she had been when I entered the tub. I went over to the stovetop. I quickly pulled out a Teflon pan that I put on a coil. I placed olive oil in the pan, then laid the dead foot skin in the oil. I didn't turn on the heat yet. I knew the bits were going to be hard. I wanted them to be hot, not colored. That would make them too hard. I chopped a yellow onion into a fine dice and plenty of cilantro leaves as well. I took some small corn tortillas and microwaved them, wrapped in wet paper towels. I then turned the stove on medium heat to start heating up, along with cooking the bits of dead skin. I knew the mild reaction wouldn't occur before they were completely clean to eat. 200 Fahrenheit on the outside, guaranteed to be the same on the inside. Crispy, but not colored, not charred. I was able to make 4 tacos out of the 5-inch tortillas. I put down a tortilla, added the hunks of skin, the onion, and cilantro on top of it. I placed down the plate of tacos in front of Maria. Along with that, I served homemade habanero pineapple hot sauce. I went to clean up before I heard her soft, beautiful voice. "Aren't you going to join me? It's our meal after all." My eyes turned to her, but my body dared not. Had it been humanly possible, I believe that I would have pushed my eyeballs out of their sockets to avoid moving my body. "Sit down and try it with me, Jason." My throat swallowed, but no saliva was being produced. I tried to turn on my heels, but a burning softness shot up my legs. My whole body turned to face her. Although my bulging eyes couldn't distract the sensation of discomfort I felt. I walked ever so fluidly, like a salmon swimming to the bear. My body fell into the chair next to her. She smiled and slid the plate to be in between the two of us. "You first. It's your cooking, dear." I sat up and gave her a weak smile. With coldness rising to my fingertips, I pinched and grabbed one of the 4 tacos, then bit into it. The initial flavor of the soapy cilantro and harsh onions that hit my palate, with the mealy texture of the tortilla to my tongue, was no match for what I felt next. My teeth struggled to bite through the hot flesh. My tongue seared. I tried to chew through my dead, hard, and stringy pieces of flesh that were from my heel. I sawed my jaw forward and back to try and cut up the almost mealworm-textured flesh. I couldn't bear to chew it again, so I swallowed it. The spiky, rough ball of food fell down into my esophagus. I had wished it blocked my windpipe, but I was not lucky enough for that. I lowered the taco and looked at her. "You didn't try it with the hot sauce?" "Oh no, I couldn't. I wanted to leave a lot for you. Don't be silly." She took the spoon in the container and placed a big scoop onto the remaining half of my taco. "Go ahead." Her beautiful eyes hit onto me. Dread overcame my being. It felt like a portal to the abyss opened up right next to me. I shoved the food into my mouth, but couldn't maintain a single bite. I felt my body start to regurgitate as I rushed my way to the kitchen sink and expelled the mouthful of food onto the awaiting dirty dishes. "Ah, can't handle your spice, hun? More for me then." She then ate every single bite of food without wincing. I cleaned the kitchen and went to our bed. I don't know how long it took until she joined me. When she went to kiss me goodnight, I nearly threw up again. I couldn't stand her hot breath hitting, then going into my nostrils. I didn't eat until 3 days later. On the 3rd day, when Maria had gone to work, I made myself some ramen while Maria was away. I saw she had ate most of the kitchen over the past few days. My gentle nerve of anxiety continued. The house I lived in was no longer my home. I stared at where she sat just a few days prior. The ramen didn't soothe my anxieties. I had trouble even choking down the soft noodles and warm broth. The gelatinous, long noodles that shoved down my throat, followed by the occasional warm broth, which felt like bile. I tried to occupy myself. I trimmed my nails, both finger and toe, and put the trimmings in an empty bathroom trash can. After that, I just went to bed. I woke up at around 9 p.m. Maria should have been well at home by this point. I went downstairs into our living room and she wasn't there. I saw her keys on the coffee table and her shoes by the couch. I felt as if a soft, gentle ping pierced my ears and echoed down into my brain. I turned ever so slowly to the kitchen, expecting to see her eyes staring at me. Nothing. No Maria. No threat. No figure. No abyss. I didn't want to search for her. I went back up. To the bedroom I pushed, like a magnet being attracted. The warm, soft bed is the only thing that had left me any sense of comfort or warmth. I stood in the center of our room. The quick urge to empty my bladder overcame me. My body trekked its way to the toilet to relieve myself. But as I entered the bathroom, there she was. Maria was hunched over the toilet, contorting her body over the toilet lid and into the garbage bin. Her index and middle finger extended in and out, taking each individual bit of my toe and fingernails into her mouth. Her head turned to me, and those beady, beautiful eyes pierced me through my soul again. The tightening of her jaw, crunching through the keratin that came from me, didn't cease. She was just looking at me while doing it. I said nothing, and made my way back across the hall into our bedroom. I felt myself fall flat to fall asleep. Sleeping is all I did for the next while. I quit my job shortly after. The feeling of having to take raw chicken with my tongs and then having to place it on a grill left me with no good feelings. I yelled at my manager, threw my card to clock in and out at him, and left. After that day, all I did was lay around and sleep. I had the occasional meal or snack when Maria wasn't around. We didn't celebrate Thanksgiving. My family had wanted to visit and finally meet Mariana, but I didn't want to see them. Maria asked me to make tacos de pie only once more. By that time, the skin on my heels had grown back. Not hard and dead, but back. It was much more difficult to slice them up that time. But I did it. This was on the 21st of December. She didn't make me eat any this time. On the 23rd, I went out all afternoon and evening drinking with a few friends. I got a ride home from an Uber. Mariana met me with her normal warm smile, and I felt so happy to see her. My arms locked around her neck, and I felt myself kissing her forehead. She asked me questions about my night, and I could barely answer. I was too drunk to form sentences. I went to bed after saying hello to Maria, then to sleep shortly after. I dreamed of wild dinosaurs and Krampus visiting me because of naughty boy I had been. When I woke up, my eyes instantly shot to the left. Maria had tied my left wrist to the bottom of the bed frame along with my neck. If the haystack charm wasn't enough, a hard gag was shoved deep in my mouth. She was holding the same folding pruning saw she bought when we first met. I couldn't move. Years of sleep paralysis and anxiety taught me to stay still. She shoved down my carving fork about 3 inches from the top of my wrist. She tightened the skin by pulling towards her and laid the saw blade flat against my arm. The teeth punctured through my skin and tugged viciously on the nerve endings in my arm. She knew what she was doing. She wasn't going deep enough to puncture into the subcutaneous tissue, but just above it. Warm blood splattered around. The teeth on the saw blade lost their grip and fumbled out from under my skin several times. Once she got close to reaching the carving fork, she removed the saw from under my skin. The blade that was so perfectly polished and upkept for the past few years was now covered in crimson fluid. As she pulled the carving fork's tip out of my wrist, it felt like she pulled out my bone marrow. She bit the very tip of my flesh and tore it off from my arm. Her favorite striped sweater was stained, and her once warm eyes hit my face. They looked like blank orbs with light pushing from behind them. The once beautiful vinyl-like strands of her hair were unkempt and knotted. The smell of iron was almost as heavy as the air. She took her time with her meal, enjoying it down to the last inch. When it reached that last inch, she stuck her fingers in my mouth and pulled out the gag. Then with the fork, she skewered my flesh onto the tip and placed it in my mouth. The cold steel and room temperature meat pushed on my tongue like if I was being treated for sideropenia. My teeth hooked onto the fork, and she slid it out of my mouth. The flesh in my mouth felt like sand nakji. I spit it out to her feet. "What are you fucking crazy? Why would you do this? No more Mariana. You're hurting me. Stop! Stop!" God damn it, Jason. I don't want to hear that. You abandoned me practically on Christmas Eve, going God knows where, doing God knows what. How do you think I'm supposed to feel? You cheated on me. You betrayed me. You hurt me. Mariana paused. And you spit out the food I prepared for you. Why would you do this to me? How could you? She snipped off the zip tie on my wrist and sawed off the rope around my throat. I felt like a puppy who misbehaved and was punished. My nose has been shoved in my shit. Maria took a pillow and blanket from our bed and went downstairs. I dare not follow. I cleaned my wound. She had bought a bottle of isopropyl alcohol that was on the master bathroom counter. I wiped off the saw and placed the carving fork on our nightstand. I slept in my own blood that night, curled up in the fetal position. When I woke up, Maria was already at work. I felt cold, thirsty, and alone. I properly dressed and treated my flayed arm. I degunked the folding mechanism of the saw and honed my carving fork, cleaned our duvet, flipped our mattress, and bleached the floor. I then sat all day in the kitchen, like the puppy I was, waiting for my owner, who I so disappointed. When she came home, I couldn't look at her. I sat by her, followed her, did what she wanted, but didn't look at or touch her. I didn't see my dad for Christmas, didn't visit Mom's grave, didn't drink or launch fireworks on New Year's. I've just been making Maria happy, as best as I could. We kissed for the first time since Christmas Eve. When I woke up, she had made me breakfast in bed. Eggs, sausages, and nice crispy bacon. For the first time since November, I ate a meal I had enjoyed. She had been learning how to cook, since she felt bad I was the only one making food for us. Her arms folded around me, and our bed felt comfortable again. As I finished the last bit of my breakfast, she kissed me on the cheek. My eyes closed in contempt. When I then smiled, her teeth sunk deep into my cheek. I quickly turned around and punched her as hard as I could in the face. My face was now ripped off and in her mouth. Her tear-filled eyes looked up at me, and she held the side of her face. Maria lurched her way over to me. The bit of my flesh now dropped out of her mouth. She stopped right in front of me. I just want your heart. She wept, placing her hand on my chest. I want you to love me like how you used to. My eyes, too, became filled with tears. I let myself fall around her. I held her tighter than I ever had before. I'm sorry. I've never stopped loving you. She looked at me, and I her. It was like our first time kissing again. When our lips locked, I felt a wave of relief that I hadn't felt since the night this started before Thanksgiving. I asked for some time to myself. She agreed and went downstairs and left me in our room. This brings me to writing this. She hasn't forgiven me for cheating on her, and I haven't forgiven myself. My wife. I hurt my wife in a way I never wanted to. I have failed as man and as a person. I don't want to see anyone else anymore. Not my family, nor my friends, and certainly not hers. I just want to see her, to be around her. I do not want to die, but I know she'll be the death of me. I want her to get help and not to go too far with this. Yet Mariana, my wife, claims she wants my heart, but she's never given me hers. I can't lose her. She won't lose me, but I don't know how to assure that. Only a few ideas are creeping through my mind and holding my soul hostage. My wife has started eating me alive, and I don't know what to do. Story 2. I've been trapped in a London Underground station for 15 years. Part 1. I was a university student on her way to a biology lecture. There wasn't, and still isn't, anything extraordinary about me. I don't know why this happened to me. Why does anything bad ever happen to anyone? Like every other early morning commuter in that underground station, I let the escalator carry me up to the lobby above ground. I dozily eyed the inclining row of posters to my left, advertising whatever was current back in 2010. I was tired and likely hungover, which was why I thought little of the feathery lightness in my skull as my mechanical step neared the top. A white blanket started to encase the world, obscuring my vision, and then I was standing not in the station's above-ground lobby, but at the bottom of the escalator. My eyesight cleared to reveal that I was where I had started. Supporting myself on the escalator's balustrade, I stepped onto the moving staircase and tried again. I assumed I'd simply had far more to drink than I previously thought. However, once again, I failed to exit the underground station. That white light swallowed my vision, returning me to the bottom of the moving staircase again, and again, and again. The horror rapidly set into my bones, as much as I tried to fight against it. After trying 5 or 6 times to exit up the escalator, I instead rushed back onto the platform and tried to board a train. But the same thing happened. That white light stole my sight and thrust me a few feet back from the platform's edge, which somehow drew absolutely no looks of interest from boarding or deboarding passengers. And believe me when I say that I tried. I turned frantically to passers-by, hoping they would share my confusion and existential panic. But they didn't. I was invisible to all, despite my best efforts. When I pleaded for help, commuters either ignored me or treated me like a leper. Such as is the way of any major city, I suppose. But this was more than that. It was as if I were being obstructed from the world, not just physically, but mentally. Something had caught me in a bubble, binding me to that London Underground station, which, for the sake of my personal safety, I won't name. Just know that I have tried, 1,000 different times in 1,000 different ways, to escape. On that very first day, a few friendly souls tried to assist. The first kind stranger came along after I'd spent half an hour relentlessly stepping onto that escalator, only to find myself returning continually to the bottom. "Are you okay, miss?" the little old lady asked. "No," I blubbered, slouching against the wall near the bottom of the stairs. "I physically can't leave." "What on earth do you mean, dear?" the woman replied, placing a tender hand on my shoulder. I sniffled, wiping tears from my cheeks, and nodded at the top of the escalator. "Let me show you." I stepped onto the escalator once again. The white light enveloped me. Then I found myself back at the bottom. Yet, the most disquieting thing happened. I turned towards that little old lady, threw my hands up exasperatedly, and found myself staring into her vacant eyes. The elderly woman looked at me as if for the first time. "Gosh, dear," she gasped. "You're crying. Are you okay?" What?" I whispered. "We were just talking. Didn't you see me try to go? Actually, what did you see?" The dottery pensioner's frown morphed into a timid, doe-eyed look. "I'm sorry, but I don't understand, sweetheart. Did I just appear out of thin air?" I screamed. My high-pitched squeal startled the poor woman. She jolted on the spot and clamped a hand to her chest. "Heavens, darling, I'm only trying to help you. When I saw you walking down the escalator, face strewn with tears, What?" I interrupted breathlessly. "You saw me walking down the escalator?" The woman gulped. "Yes, love. You looked a million miles away. Is there somebody I need to call? I mean this in the kindest possible way. You don't seem to be in a balanced state of mind. Please get me out of here." I trembled, heart starting to feel as weighty as my head. "Right. I'll go and fetch help," promised the woman, who scurried fearfully past me onto the escalator. I never saw her again, but I truly believe that the stranger did intend to fetch help. I'll get to that. I took my trusty Samsung SA300 Ultra Touch out of my pocket. Not sponsored. He was just my dearest friend for many years in this solitary cell. Sammy, I called him. Anyhow, I started by calling and texting every single person in my contact list, which was when the true terror started to wriggle its way into my flesh. My friends and relatives were all alarmed by my situation. Each of them promised to help. Each of them failed to help. People would read my texts or answer my calls, but I'd hear nothing back from them. And when I'd ask for updates on the cavalry arriving to save me, I'd get responses such as, "Oh, I don't remember seeing this message." "Sorry. What? When did you send this? You need help with what?" Every single person forgot about me, and they all kept forgetting about me, kept forgetting, most importantly, about my situation. It was just as it had been with that old woman. People were forgetting me, and I was supposedly forgetting moving my feet back down the escalator. I know this all sounds impossible. Even to me, it still feels like a horrible, horrible dream. And like every bad dream, it comes with a monster. That very first day of imprisonment passed in a horrid blur. The arms of insanity had already embraced me by midnight when the station emptied and the trains stopped coming. This was, unbeknownst to me, only one day out of thousands to come. Still, I had hope. There's one thing Transport for London doesn't abide, and it's homeless people, I thought, pressing my spine into the curvature of the corridor's tiled wall. A member of staff phoned the police when I'm caught sleeping rough. Then somebody will come to rescue me, arrest me. Same thing. Nobody came. I felt foolish for thinking somebody would. After all, that place was muddying people's minds. I'm absolutely certain that an underground employee will have seen me on a CCTV camera, but that mysterious force will have wiped his or her memory. I pictured somebody reaching for the phone, fully intending to rat me out to the police, only to absent-mindedly get up and fetch a biscuit from the tin instead. I sobbed as the nature of my paranormal prison, far below the ground, dawned on me. I was trapped, and nobody saw me. No person saw me, I should say. Around 3 in the morning, as my eyelids drifted together, there came the sharp smacks of something striking the distant floor of a distant hallway, somewhere deep within the station. It sounded like wet feet, fresh out of a bath, slapping against tiles. I dismissed it as a dream, of course. Besides, I was already focusing on my migraine, which seemed to have been induced by the pounding of something akin to a tiny mallet behind my retinas. When I opened my eyes to find myself sitting against the wall near the escalators, sunlight pouring from the lobby above, I screamed. Worst of all, I screamed right in the face of a kind young rail service worker looking at me. I remember thinking that he looked quite sweet, with his warm smile and overgrown brown locks. That distracted me, if only for a moment, from the terror of what I'd endured the day before. It all quickly came back to me, of course. "I'm afraid you're not allowed to nap here," the blue-shirted station worker said. "I know you've probably not been here long, but I've been here all night," I interjected with a quivering voice. I was half telling myself, as I struggled to believe that I'd actually spent the night at a train station. The young man, possibly only a few years older than me, smiled. "As I said, I don't think you've been sleeping for that long, miss. You're probably just a little disoriented. It's 3 o'clock in the afternoon. If you'd been here all night, somebody would have moved you along." I didn't reply. I just turned to look at that awful escalator which had haunted me the day before. The worker nodded slowly, and a pitying frown, much like the one of the old lady, started to spread across his face. "You look hungry. Would you like a bite to eat?" I didn't want a bite to eat. I wanted to get out of that hellish place. But this was the first person who'd properly seen me since I first found myself trapped down there, and it had been a long, long 24 hours. I was tired. I was hungry. I was frightened. For all of those reasons, I obliged and followed the young staff member to his office down a nearby corridor. As he entered the 4-digit code beside the door, I logged it in my mind. I had a feeling that this room might become essential to my survival, and I wasn't wrong. The worker sat me on a swivel chair and fetched a cheese sandwich and some grapes from the fridge. A blessed sight after a whole day without food. Anyway, I practically inhaled all of the grub whilst he sat on another swivel chair opposite me. "I'm not homeless," I insisted between mouthfuls, nodding at the bag by my feet. "Look inside. I'm a student at King's College." I kicked the yellow rucksack over, and the worker unzipped it. "Oh, right," he said, eyeing one of my biology books. "Were you just skipping a class to catch up on some rest? My sister goes to uni, and she never gets enough sleep." I shook my head. "I'm trapped." He raised an eyebrow. "Trapped?" I nodded. "I know you won't believe me, but every time I try to leave this station, I end up right back down here. It started yesterday. I reach the top of the escalator, or the inside of a train, then a white light blinds me, and I find myself back in the station." He seemed concerned by my admission. Unlike anyone else, however, this employee, this stranger, didn't treat me like a mad woman, and that felt like the first dose of something resembling normality in the past day. "That sounds awful," the worker replied. "Are you prone to seizures?" I might have believed so, I said. "But, well, that doesn't explain the rest of it." "The rest of it?" he asked. "The scariest thing about all of this is the way folk are treating me," I explained. "Strangers, relatives, friends, it doesn't matter. They all promise to help me, but then they forget that we even had a conversation." "Well, that's just simply not true," the man said, standing up and extending a hand. "Come on, I'll lead you out of the station right now. We'll walk up the escalator together, then we'll book you a taxi to the hospital, okay? I'm not a doctor, but it really sounds like you've bumped your head or something." "No," I said. "You'll forget that we had this conversation. My own mother keeps forgetting about my situation, no matter how many times I explain it to her. With strangers, it's worse. They forget that I exist." "Let's not be strangers then. I'm Peter," he said. What's your name? Carla, I answered. He smiled. Lovely to meet you, Carla. Right, here's another idea. Stay here until the end of my shift. I'll keep popping my head in and out to check on you. Raid the fridge, you must be starving, and charge your phone. But at the end of my shift, we need to make a plan, okay? And if I see any sign of anything resembling a medical emergency, then I'm fine. I'm not having seizures, I insisted. Peter frowned. I really should just call someone, shouldn't I? If you try, you'll forget all of this, I promised. I don't believe that, he said. But he did. He must have done. Otherwise, as he said, he would have called someone. He wouldn't have let me spend the next 8 hours in that room. Just like the day before, I spent Peter's shift attempting to get help from family members and friends, but the nightmare repeated, looping endlessly. My loved ones were worried. They hadn't forgotten that I existed, but their minds were muddled, befuddled. They were part of whatever had cursed me. Something, whatever was keeping me in that underground station, seemed to be ensuring that I would receive no outside help. Worst of all, come 11 in the night, Peter did not appear in the office's doorway. Instead, I was greeted by a very confused woman in the same blue uniform. "Who on earth are you?" she asked rather placidly. I realized that I'd been fortunate over the past day not to come face to face with any rough, tough employees. "Get out before I call the police." I wanted to explain myself, but I was young, so I panicked. After collecting my phone, charger, and bag, I scurried out of the office, then ran through a near-deserted corridor towards the escalators. I nearly tried once again to escape, but I thought instead of Peter, so I decided to look for him, the one person who'd truly seen and heard me. I searched the emptying tunnels of the station, but there was no sign of him. He forgot me after all, I dejectedly thought. I sat against the wall by the escalators, hoping that the woman on duty would spot me on the CCTV camera and call the police, but no one ever came. I didn't need to be taken by the white light. People were capable of forgetting me on their own. And that, I was well aware, had something to do with the force orchestrating my imprisonment. I thought about all of this as I drifted off to sleep again. The headache behind my eyes returned, though there came no haunting smacks against tiles on that second night. I never saw Peter again. And from that third day onwards, I found that my humanity flitted rather quickly away, much like time itself. I focused only on my survival. For weeks and then months, I survived as a panhandler, subsisting by begging for whatever strangers would give. Utilizing Peter's code, I'd occasionally sneak into the office too. I always waited for the on-duty employee to leave, of course, then I'd steal food from the fridge and charge my phone. I knew full well that, even if a member of staff were to catch me, my existence would quickly be erased from his or her memory. Even I had forgotten that I existed. I was no longer Carla. I meant as little to the world above as the rats scurrying through the tunnels, surviving on whatever scraps they found. That being said, I still tried to escape in various ways. Once, I attempted to burrow through the station wall. As I picked away at a brick with a kitchen knife, railway workers and commuters attempted to stop me, but I would wait for them to forget, then I would continue. After months of work, I had successfully removed quite a few bricks, and I poked my head through the opening late at night. However, the white light spat me back out, killing that dream of escape. There came the sounds, from time to time, of smacking against tiles, distant, but never really that distant at all. And so it continued that way for years, until a visual joined the noise. One night, around the Christmas of 2013, I saw something which almost made me scream. Fortunately, my paralyzed throat stopped me. A shadow, like a rising and falling wave, painted the white-tiled walls of a corridor perpendicular to mine. My eyes ached from my nightly migraine, but I knew that they were telling me no lies, and neither were my ears. Something was skulking in the hallways. I wanted to run, but my mind and body somehow drifted off to sleep. As I fell into that dark slumber, I screamed internally, imagining that I would never wake up again. I was certain that the source of the shadow would find me whilst I rested. And this will finally come to an end, I bleakly thought with a hint of relief. When I woke on the floor of the station, I was both relieved and disappointed in equal measure. After 3 years, time had become a fuzzy concept to me. I'd made it that way. Otherwise, I would have succumbed to total psychological ruin, driven mad by isolation in that dungeon of cream-colored tiles and fluorescent lights. Essentially, I still wanted to survive, and dissociating was the way to do that. However, Christmas was a marker that I struggled to ignore, a reminder of the years passing by. And when I saw that festive tree go up for the fifth time, I felt my 25-year-old heart strain. I'd forgotten by the world above. Actually, it was more terrible than that. My friends and family remembered me, yet they'd done nothing to save me in 5 years. That wasn't their fault, but it was a tough pain to put into words. Anyway, during that Christmas of 2015, I was possessed by a strange idea. As the nightly migraine swam through the crevices of my gray matter, I thought of that shadow I'd seen, only the once, years earlier. I thought of how much tighter my eyeballs had felt, tighter than ever before. The rhythm of that pounding headache had been loud enough to fill my ear canals. It had dulled slightly when I closed my eyes, however. I wondered whether sight might be causing the headaches. Maybe, even when I didn't realize it, I'd been seeing the skulker. I climbed to my feet and made my way to the station's platform. Then I eyed the black mouth of the tunnel to the left. Over the past 5 years, I had heard the tunnel spit occasional smacks and splatters, similar to those awful sounds I'd first heard years earlier. Something prowled the halls of the station at night, something that I feared might live in the tunnel. I'd tried to escape through that tunnel before, many months earlier. The white light had, of course, taken me. However, unlike my other escape routes, the experience came with a skull-splitting headache. It had been an agony that put all of my other migraines to shame. Something was special about that tunnel, which was why I chose it over the escalator. I clambered down from the platform onto the railway tracks, knowing that the night guard in the office would likely have seen me on her security feed. Of course, I also knew that she would have already forgotten about me. This was the blessing and the curse of the underground station's spell. Once I was standing on the tracks, facing the black void of the tunnel, I blindfolded myself with my old, filthy scarf. Then, with a deep breath, I walked forwards. 30 seconds later, I could tell that I'd entered the tunnel. My footsteps had been ricocheting off the large expanse of the station. Then the enclosed space had muffled them. I'd made it through the mouth of the tunnel. My heartbeat quickened as I pushed onwards. The last time I'd entered the tunnel, without a blindfold, I'd been walloped by that familiarly horrid wall of white. Worse, I'd been torn apart by an ache in my skull. This time, none of that happened. I walked, and nothing stopped me. 5 minutes later, the reverberating sound of my feet against the metal tracks started to spread far and wide, started to fill a far larger space. No, I gasped, realizing what that meant as I started to undo my scarf blindfold. I uncovered my eyes to find myself standing on the tracks beside the next station. For the first time in 5 years, I had traveled beyond the bounds of my prison. I started to bounce giddily from foot to foot, but my jig lasted only a moment. My eyes caught something, 20 feet away, on the otherwise deserted platform. A man. He was facing the wall, wearing the cerulean jacket and light blue undershirt of a typical station worker. His knotty, shoulder-length hair was marred with muck and specks of red, but it looked vaguely familiar. "Help me!" I screamed. As I ran towards the edge of the platform, my headache returned, and white crept into the sides of my vision. I felt myself starting to reset. I felt, in fact, something worse, scalding breath, billowing in puffs of steam against my goosebump-covered nape. And then, just before the world slipped away from me, the man on the platform raised his hands backwards to part his scraggly hair. Only, those shaggy curtains did not draw to reveal the back of his head. His hair parted to reveal a horridly glum face, the face of Peter. The railway worker, who I hadn't seen for 5 years, was facing the wrong way. His neck had been twisted all of the way around, pointing his morose facial features in the opposite direction to his body below. Undeniably, the blood-covered man was no longer alive. I shrieked as the white enveloped my vision. Then I found myself back where I belonged. I was sitting against the wall in the station which had been my home for 5 years, and all became clear. Even if I could escape beyond the boundaries of my prison, the thing in the tunnel would find me and pull me back. Now, it's 2025. 10 years later, Christ. Since then, I've only stooped deeper into the throes of depression and lunacy. I'm a 35-year-old woman who breaks into a night guard's office, stealing sandwiches, water, and a socket to charge my phone, which is now a dusty, half-broken iPhone, as my Samsung was, sadly, pickpocketed 8 years ago. Something keeps me going, my will, or that of the thing in the tunnel. I have, in the past 10 years, stayed far away from that tunnel, but I still hear and see things. That long, wavy shade on the wall, wet, thwacking footsteps against the floor, it is searching for me. Not every night, or perhaps I simply don't hear it every night. I stumbled across this subreddit today, and I'm reaching out to you for help. I don't have much hope that this will work. I think you'll read this post, promise to help me, then forget about me. That's the way it's worked for years. Perhaps you'll remember one day. Perhaps you'll all remember the things you've forgotten about me when the spell is broken. I'm just afraid that it'll only be broken once that thing finds me. Once I find myself standing beside Peter. Part 2. I've been trapped in a London underground station for 15 years. I was cynical. I thought you would all forget about me. And maybe some of you have forgotten me. Maybe all of you have forgotten me, except for one person. Hey, is your story real? That was the message I received from a Redditor who shall remain anonymous. I huffily told him that, yes, my story is real. Thank you very much. I didn't understand why anybody would lie about such a thing. Maybe I'd been living in a London underground station too long, under that proverbial rock. That was certainly what the Redditor implied. He said, people lie about all kinds of things. Are you new to the internet? Lol. I've been imprisoned in a train station for 15 years with nothing but a string of smartphones to keep me company. What do you think? I snarkily replied. Okay, I'm sorry, he messaged. In fairness, I was just thinking that you've missed a lot above the surface. The world's quite different now. So, you've really been trapped down there since 2010. Yes, I really have, I replied. Well, then I guess I'd better tell you something that you might help you, he said. I'm not sure whether I'll believe it, this being the internet and all. You know, the home of lies, I sassily messaged. Okay, I deserve that, he admitted. Look, take my story or leave it, but your tale is reminiscent of something that happened to me in India when I worked for Doctors Across Borders. I found myself trapped in a remote village. None of us were able to step more than 10 feet beyond the outer border of the town. And we learnt, much like you, that we weren't alone. I still don't know how to describe what I saw and heard, mostly just a shadow against the walls of buildings. It hid well, only ever attacking at night. I'm not sure where it went during the day, but we came to realize that this thing hunted like a spider. It had caught us in its web, and it planned to devour us. People disappeared, one by one. The cattle, too. Nearly every living thing was devoured by this creature. Now here's my hypothesis, and I'll explain it. This creature was never trying to trap you. It was only ever trying to trap Peter. You were unwittingly caught in its web. Who knows how or why? All we know is that the creature clearly doesn't see you, or you would have died on that first night too. That's how you've lived for so long right under its nose. You were never meant to be stuck there. The trap was laid for Peter, and it worked, but this creature must sense you, the unexpected anomaly. That would explain why it still prowls the station's corridors. Let me explain. See, the villagers and I survived our encounter in India through sheer luck. Only one creature in that village was spared. We saw it happen as we watched from our hiding spot in a barn. The beast, a long shadow snaking through the streets, devoured some poor, fleeing residents, a cow, a cat, and anything else in its way. Anything and everything except for the great Indian bustard. It's a bird prevalent to that region. Anyway, this bustard stood dumbly and blissfully at the side of the street, but the snaking, shadowy creature slithered straight past it. It completely avoided the bird. Now, we knew that it could have been a fluke, but we were desperate. We had to believe that this beast didn't see the bustard. We had to believe that it could see only the things it wanted to consume. The very next night, we had an idea. We captured a poor bustard, and we laid a trap. We bound the bird with a piece of rope to one of the surviving chickens, and we set the pair in the middle of the street. Then we waited and watched late at night. And sure enough, in a horrifying display, The beast came again that night. It devoured the chicken, but it also unknowingly devoured the great Indian bustard. And then, in a terrible display of roars and writhing, the beast choked and died. It just liquefied into a wretched puddle. So you see my point, don't you? I replied, yes, but I don't have a great Indian bustard with me down here. They're not exactly native to London. The thing hunting you is not the thing which hunted me, he replied. Its blind spot doesn't seem to be a great Indian bustard, does it? It seems to be you. Oh, I'm the bustard, I typed shakily, finally catching the stranger's drift. For whatever reason, yes, you just might be, he replied. Fuck, I said. Yeah, he agreed. Well, I'm not exactly going to feed myself to him. That won't save me, will it? I said. Think about it. You don't need to feed all of yourself to him, said the stranger, which is a sentence that will forever haunt me. Christ, I said. Just a pound of flesh? A pinch of a pound? I don't know, Carla. I really don't. But you're running out of options, aren't you? You don't want to live down there forever, he said. And I should add that you were right to cover your eyes, you know? One of the villagers looked directly at that thing for too long. We all saw glimpses of it, but she was hypnotized by it. She never was quite right after that. So I should do this blindfolded? I asked. I would, he replied. And what did I have to lose? 15 years of solitude. I was ready, one way or another, for all to come to an end. I wanted to survive, of course, but if I didn't, then at least the nightmare would be over. That was my mindset. Using the bladed edge of some scissors I swiped from the office, I began the excruciating work of slicing skin away from my thigh. I'd also swiped a bottle of alcohol, but let me tell you that it did little to help. I studied biology, not medicine. I didn't know what I was doing, but the thigh seemed like a good spot to take a pound of flesh. Actually, nowhere near even an eighth of a pound. But I'm not a bustard. I planned on sacrificing as little of myself as possible to this monster. After all, I had no idea whether the internet stranger's story had any truth to it. I wasn't planning to hack into my body for nothing. When the vomit-inducing chunk of flesh came away, I quickly covered the wound with a clean bandage, mainly stolen from the office's first aid box. I prayed that my leg wouldn't get infected, prayed that it would be enough to satiate the beast's hunger. Then, with a sharp sting in my left leg, I staggered towards the station's tunnel. I had decided, given my hellish encounter a decade earlier, that this black pit at the left-hand side of the platform must be the home of the beast. I used an elastic band to bind my removed strip of thigh flesh to. This greatly saddens me. A rat. Believe me when I say that it took many hours to ensnare the poor, unwitting fella who was only scurrying around with his friends. The cruelest part was hobbling his little legs so that he wouldn't be able to escape. Survival is a merciless thing. Wearing my scarf, older and filthier than ever, as a blindfold once more, I walked up to the platform edge with my poisonous, fleshy, wriggling meal in hand. I dropped onto the tracks below, which were covered in water and sludge from recent flooding. Then I moved into the mouth of the tunnel, and my footsteps grew intimate as I entered the monster's lair. There came not a low growl from the depths of the blackness, but a distant plink, the plink of something stepping in a far-off puddle. I felt the rat squirm disapprovingly in my hand, and I mumbled words of apology as I placed the crippled creature wearing a strip of my thigh onto the tracks. Then I started to back away slowly. A series of watery slaps immediately sounded. They were not measured, but fast. Awfully fast. Fast, yet still inexplicably heavy. This bulky monster was far too nimble for its mass. I knew that even with my eyes covered, so I started to back away more quickly. The creature approached too speedily, however, and I tripped backwards, thumping my spine painfully against the metal tracks below. Lying on the railway tracks, I expected the thing to pounce upon me, but it found my bait instead. Then followed the sounds of squelching as the beast munched on the defenseless creature, as it munched also on the piece of my flesh. It did not take long for a hiss to spill out of the thing's mouth, or some orifice. The sound severed the quiet of that tunnel into two halves, one empty and one full of that repugnant spittle-coated breath which had spattered across my skin. And I don't know what possessed me to do it, but I'm grateful that I tore the scarf from my eyes. Though I saw absolutely nothing in the black tunnel surrounding me, I immediately understood something horrifying. The creature, at long last, saw me. It was as if by devouring my flesh, that thing, hidden in the shadows, had fixed its narrow vision. In response, without any conscious input, my body bounced to a standing position, swiveled on a heel, then barreled towards the not-so-distant glow of the underground station about 30 feet away. But as I ran, migraine starting to come into effect, I heard pursuing clomps, wet clomps from that unseen creature which had unintentionally entrapped me in its web or bubble for 15 terrifying years. Its breath swept through the tunnel, encompassing me. Once I made it to the fluorescent lights of my underground home, I scrambled onto the platform, making a firm effort not to turn back. But peripheral vision is the darndest thing. I saw something direful out of the corner of my eye as I dashed towards the tiled hallway ahead. It came from the tunnel's mouth into the light. There was no body, no large hairy beast. 15 years of fantasies involving titanic wolves and felines had all failed me. The truth was a terror beyond human imagination. Since seeing it, I've been telling myself that my eyes must have deceived me. After all, I saw it only in my vision's periphery. There emerged a face. It was a face nearly human, save for the fact that it filled the entire entrance of the tunnel, squishing against the brickwork as it struggled to squeeze out. Pale flesh finally slithered through the tunnel's half-moon opening, like an ice pop surfacing. However, most of the creature's face, or what my edge vision detected as a face, for I still don't believe whatever I saw, was filled with ginormous jaws. A wide-open mouth with pearly whites that each matched me in dimensions. A single fang would have been sufficient to obliterate my body. Its flesh, which seemed to be emitting the hissing sound I had heard, it was emitting black plumes of gas, as if the creature were evaporating, possibly from the meal it had consumed. He was right, I thought. I'm a bustard. I saw all of this in the space of what must have been, at most, a half-second. I didn't stop. I ran. My brain whirred in horror as I attempted to process whatever I'd seen, an uncanny face of some human giant, 10 times the size of any mortal man. Maybe. Maybe not. I'll never know, and I never want to know. I rounded the corridor's corner to face the escalator. My mortal enemy for half of my life. Half of my fucking life. I sprinted towards it, tagged by that gargantuan thing whose flesh slapped rapidly against tiles. Then there came pain like no other. A blazing pain. It tore across my ankle. Something large had coiled around me, bringing me tumbling down against the escalator's static steps. And I felt my foot ripping away, felt muscles, bones, and tendons being chewed inside that monster's powerful maw. Before the being had a chance to move its bite a little higher, however, an almighty sound came. It was neither a bellow nor a whisper, but something in between, like the cry of a very, very old thing. A thing taking its final breath after eons of existence. I didn't want to turn, but I had to do so. I had to know it was over. And when I did, I found myself looking at something other than the monster. I found myself looking down at the tiles, just past the bottom of the escalator, to see a black, watery puddle spreading across the floor. I shuffled, unable to walk on my bloody stump, towards the button for the escalator. Then I thumped it with my fist. I felt myself fading as the staircase carried my half-alive body up to the top of the station. And as my eyesight faded, I realized something. Not just that it was blackness, rather than whiteness, which swallowed my vision. No, I realized, most wonderfully of all, that I had achieved something for the first time in 15 years. I had made it to the top of the escalator. I woke this morning in a hospital bed, surrounded by family and friends who had spent over a decade searching for me. I showed them the messages and calls we'd been exchanging since 2010, but none of them understood. I still hardly understand it either. It's as if my loved ones remember it all, yet simultaneously don't remember a thing. They don't remember how they left me in that underground station to rot. Their heads hurt, probably in the same way that my head used to hurt, whenever they try to think about it, so I've told them to stop. It doesn't matter now. I'm safe. It's over. Earlier, I messaged my internet hero. I'm sorry it took so much from you, Carla, he said. But I'm glad you made it. I did, and I'll never take the underground again.